So now, I'm going with Ephraim, Manessah, and Simeon. When we talk about Joseph, we're talking about Ephraim and Manessah. So we're talking about Puerto Rico, we're talking about Cuba, and we're also talking about Hispaniola. Now, I'm not going to get into Simeon just yet. I'm going to break him down later. You understand? But the archaeology that I'm about to bring out has to do with the Caribbean. So that's why I'm linking these three together, all right? So now, Joseph is a bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, meaning what? That he's a tree, he's fruitful. And now he's by a well, meaning what? Water, just like Ephraim was by the islands. You understand? He's letting you know that these Indians, these people out, the tribe of Ephraim was going to be by a water supply. You understand? So now whose branches run over the wall, meaning what? It's just like the scripture says that Ephraim is a cake not turned. You understand? Ephraim started to mix himself with all these other people, all these other nations. And that's a history that we've had inside these different captivities. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. That's the so-called white man conquering Puerto Rico, conquering the Bahamas, conquering Hispaniola. And I didn't have enough time. I had so much things that I wanted to put in here, but one of them was some of the ships and navigators, if they wanted to know how to get to the next island, all they had to do was follow a trail of floating bodies. That's how many of them they were killing. So now, but his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty power of Jacob. So now you start to see that, you understand, like Ephraim is somebody who's noted for being strong and strengthened, even by God the Father, who shall help thee, by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with the blessings of heaven above, and blessings of the deep and under that lieth, blessing of the breast and of the womb. Meaning, like, let me tell you something, man. Like, my father got 5 kids. He told me some of them got pregnant through birth control. You understand? Like, I'm telling you, like, he like Ephraimite or something like that, we hung a sister, she might get pregnant. Straight up and down. I'm telling you. Sneeze too close to you. You know what I'm saying? I'm on child support. Crazy. So now the blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of thy progenitors, meaning that this is a tribe, which is why they ended up becoming, you understand, the head of the northern kingdom, because of the inheritance, because of the blessings that they had. Next slide. So now, the next publication, which we will discuss, will be a piece of 19th century literature by some German, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Kaiserling, whatever. So his work primarily deals with the contributions of the Jews to the voyages of Christopher Columbus. So it starts talking about the Caribbean. And what he finds out is that the Indians of the Americas are the lost tribes of Israel. And the main focus is on the Taínos and the Arawaks. So now, once again, we're talking about Hispaniola, the Simeonites, and we're talking about the Taínos, the Caribs, the rest of the Arawaks, meaning what? We're talking about Ephraim and Manessah on Cuba and Puerto Rico. Next slide. This is the book, if any of you want to know. This is what he wrote. Christopher Columbus and the participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese discoveries. Next slide. This is a letter that was, this is a translation of a primary source. There was a conquistador, a Portuguese cat, that he turned around and he started studying the North American Indians. He started studying the Indians of the Caribbeans, and this is what he found. The language of the Indians in Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, and the adjoining islands, he contends that it has many resemblances to Hebrew. So he starts breaking down all the different words that all line up with Hebrew. So their rites and ceremonies, as well as their language, form one of the main arguments in favor of this theory of descent. Circumcision prevailed among the Indians. They often bathed in rivers because we invented cleanliness. You understand? Like, next slide. And streams. They refrained from touching the dead because you would have to be quarantined then. You came around the dead, you were unclean for 7 days. And from tasting blood. They had definite fast days, meaning what? The Day of Atonement. Marriage with sister-in-laws was permitted if they were childless widows. Right there, that's the law of the kinsman. Wives were discarded for new helpmates because, once again, the law of Moses said that you were able to divorce. They also sacrificed first fruits on high mountains and under shady trees. They had temples and carried a holy ark before them in a time of war. They were also, like the 10 tribes, inclined to idol worship because, once again, that's why the white man came over and destroyed us. But we still had traces of our culture. Next slide. This right here, Los Indios de las Indias Islas son Hebreos. The Indians of the islands are Hebrews. What we just read was the translated version of this letter. Next slide. A Portuguese marino, Villafort, who strange to say had called himself Montesinos and afterwards assumed the name Aaron Levi, informed Manessah that he had mingled in South America with Jews of the 10 tribes. Why is this so important? Remember this later. Remember he was in South America. Next slide. This is from Lost Tribes and Promised Land. The woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue. So this is Montesinos with this cat, Francisco, and they were in Quito, Peru. While they were in Quito, Peru, this is what happened. It says that they spoke in a language he could not understand. Blase, blase. Upon hearing the words, they rose, they went over to Montesinos and heard his utter astonishment. Shema Yasha'Allah Yahweh Lahayana wa Yahweh Akkad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism. A brief conversation then ensued in their common ancestral tongue, according to Montesinos, whose fluency in it is almost as perplexing to the reader of his narrative as that of his 3 mysteries to his companions. They told him that they themselves were of the tribe of Reuben, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on islands nearby. So now who was this tribe of Joseph that lived on islands nearby? This was Ephraim and Manessah, inside the same islands where they were sacrificing first fruits on the mountains, circumcising their young, keeping the laws, statutes, and commandments that they knew about still at this time. Next slide. Oh yeah, now it gets deep.
Llegó una ondulación en el terreno donde estaban las piedras y empezó a
He's talking about these stones, these rocks. Okay?
Poco a poco. Y las estudió y en un principio, pues él pensó que la escritura que tenían representada era escritura hebreo-caldaica.
Hebreo. These characters are Hebrew.
Eso tenía relación con las tribus perdidas de Israel. Al ser esto,
and it says that they have the 10 tribes of Israel.
Algunos arqueólogos plantearon que el padre falsificó las piezas y pues poco a poco en un origen las piezas eran 800.
Take a look at all those stones.
Y se fue desmembrando la colección y hoy día pues nos queda aquí en Puerto Rico aproximadamente.
These stones are known as the stones of Father Nazario. They were passed down by one of the chiefs all throughout his generations, and the chief's daughter went and passed these over, you understand, to this cat called Father Nazario. For years, they knew about these stones. Then somebody turned around and said, yo, these stones have Hebrew on them. And they started to translate the stones. Not only did it say that they crossed the Atlantic, but it had the names of the 10 tribes of Israel who left the captivity of Assyria. This was found inside Puerto Rico. There was hundreds of these stones. And what happened is that they had to fight with the government even to keep them. The majority of these interviews were in Spanish, except for maybe 1 or 2. Give me the next slide. I want y'all to see this video right here.
A friend of mine, he is a director, a curator in a museum in France, because Alphonse Pinard took some pieces to different museums. And I said, man, are these pieces there? He says, man, yeah, they're here, right? And in France, he found like 38 artifacts that the father had given to the priest. So he writes to me, hey, but the stones say Hanoa, Puerto Rico. Hanoa, Puerto Rico. Hanoa, what's Hanoa? Like I've been researching Hanoa. And I've been looking at historical documents, everything, right? And so I began saying, well, Hanoa, put it on the internet, So Hanoa.
Pause this real quick.
It's a territory. Where
on these stones, right? There were certain stones that were sent to France. They start studying them. They find Hanoa, Puerto Rico. So he starts looking through every ancient manifest he can find to try to find Hanoa in Puerto Rico. Can't find it. So now, where do you think the only place Hanoa existed in the world? Hit play.
Tribe of Ephraim was located. And so
give me the next slide. Hanoa, a place named on the eastern boundary of Ephraim, meaning that this was in the land of the northern kingdom. So the sons of Joseph were on islands nearby South America. the Caribbean, where they found Hebrew stones with Hanoah carved into them. Don't tell me the 12 tribe chart ain't accurate. This is the goddamn tribe of Ephraim. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. But now, this came out in 2017. I already knew this in the 70s. You understand? In the late 60s. Since 1969, we knew this. And y'all want to talk about, oh, it was a vision. Man, fuck you. Excuse me. You understand? Salakia. So I'm sorry. I apologize. But the point being is that y'all cannot come against this, man. You understand? Like, this, I.S.U.P.K is the home of the truth. Next slide. So now this is the Aborigines of Puerto Rico and the neighboring islands. Now, mind you, in the very beginning of this book, it says that whatever is true for this is also true for Hispaniola. So now, once again, all this has to do with Simeon as well. Whatever you start to prove for the Puerto Ricans is what you can prove for the Cubans, is what you can also prove for Hispaniola. Next slide. So now what you start to find out is that, I'm gonna just fast forward straight to the point. This is basically about how we had multiple wives. I mean, you want me to skip over that? I don't think you do. Thought so. So comparatively, little is known about the marriage customs of the native Aboriginal of Puerto Rico, and it is commonly stated that wives were treated as slaves. Now, why did I say this? Because that's exactly what they try to say about us today. Because as soon as the white man sees that a woman is cooking and cleaning, you understand, for her husband, she's a slave now. You understand? The white man is the devil trying to break up our families. You understand? There is every reason to believe that the caciques were polygamous, meaning that they had more than one wife. That's a part of our culture. That is so wild. The great men recorded, so he starts talking more about that. So now Lacasas mentions that the betrothals of the caciques would-be husband would send his principal man to the maid's father, meaning that he would send his servant to the woman's father. So now, what you start to find out is that they would turn around and they would pay dowries for the bride. So they would turn around and he'd be like, yo, this is your daughter. I want to marry her. And then he would turn around and give him something for him. And then they drop down. And it says that this is directly connected as becoming of the servants of her father as Jacob served Laban for Rachel and Leah. You can go and you can find every single one of our customs, culture, all throughout all of the culture of the North American Indians. Next slide. So now traces of Phoenician, when you see Phoenician, this is talking about ancient Hebrew. Traces of Phoenician involvement in the Caribbean go beyond Cuba, meaning they found Hebrew in Cuba, appearing in the strange bearded petroglyphs of the islands of Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. Next slide. So what you start to find out is also the strange headpieces that they found, meaning that they called this a turban. So what the hell was a mitre or a turban doing carved into a rock inside of Puerto Rico? Next slide. Also, the same way that they had these, they try to say, oh, Indians can't grow beards, this and that. We started carving what the hell we can do and what we couldn't do inside these walls.